Hi, wanted to share a few thoughts on this based on the song that we recorded a while back, Love the Lord Your God. There's a line in there that says, we have Jesus Christ to give. And that's not how I grew up learning that song. I thought the words were a little different there, but that's how it's written in our songbooks. We have Jesus Christ to give. And so that phrase has been in my mind a little bit. I've been thinking about, okay, what kind of Jesus do I have to give? And I know that any of us can only share the Jesus that we have ourselves. We can't give what we don't have. So that's just been making me think about that a little bit. What kind of Jesus do I have to give? You know, we could think of so many different attributes or aspects of God that we would want to give, but what's essential? That's what I was thinking, but what's essential Jesus? Because that's what we want to give. And as I was thinking about that, overcomer was the word that just kept coming up to me. I see that Jesus he's the overcomer. And that's what it says in Revelation chapter 3. So Revelation 3:21 says, the one who conquers, or some versions say overcome, to the one who overcomes, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. So Jesus is saying that he's the overcomer. He overcame. So he had to overcome some things. And because he did, he's now inviting us to that same life. So how important is that really? You know, I think it's more than just a word that popped into my head about Jesus being the overcomer. So that got me to reading through First John a little bit more. So I have a few thoughts on First John, and I think I'll just read a few verses here in First John chapter 5. So First John chapter 5, starting in verse 1. I'll read verse 1 through 5, and then I'll skip down to read verse 10. It connects connects the thoughts pretty well. So everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world, except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? Then verse 10, whoever believes in the Son of God has the testimony in himself. So the testimony of everyone born of God is found there in verse 4. It says, everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. So that's why I say it's not just some sideline thing, it's essential. Everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. That's our testimony. So if we wonder, what do I share? What do I need? What does the world need? Well, this is everybody's testimony. That every believer, that's what it says here. Everybody's testimony is that they've overcome everyone has overcomes the world, not has overcome the world, but overcomes the world. So it's a progressive thing. We're doing it daily. I have heard some interesting quotes and stories that I think help to show this too. I read a quote one time that says, even saying no to a cookie can be a fast. And that's, if you apply that to overcoming, you say no to a cookie. You feel like eating 2 cookies, but no, I'm not going to have that one. Or here's this thing that comes up, and I normally would say a rough word in this situation. I'm going to not say it this time. And so it's little things like that. That's how it starts. I heard another testimony of somebody who said he had a really foul mouth. He just swear all the time. It would just blurt out of his mouth, no control. He said when he got born again, God gave him a 1/1000. So basically, he had a split second where he could decide now if he was going to say that word or not. But that was God's initial check in his spirit. He didn't immediately have all the words erased from his mind, but he had a 1/1000. He had a little moment where he could think about if he was going to go ahead or not. And as he yielded to that and made a good decision every time, those words disappeared from his mind and it got easier and easier. So we're not saying that we have to have overcome everything. We don't just start our testimony when we've overcome everything. Life is a life of constant overcoming because there's always new things being revealed to us that we don't know yet. And then we have another opportunity to overcome. But that's why I like it. It's overcoming, overcomes. That's an ongoing thing. So every one of us, we need that testimony that we're overcoming. And that goes beyond just being able to say to somebody, hey, you need to be an overcomer. That's not really a testimony. The testimony here, that's why I like connecting verse 10 here, because it says, whoever believes in the Son of God has the testimony in himself. So whether we say anything or not, if we're overcoming, if we really are, if we're really born of God, we are going to overcome, and we're going to have that testimony in ourselves. So we'll be making a statement with our life, whether we say anything or not. And I think Paul shows that example too in Acts when there's these 7 sons of Sceva. They're trying to cast out an evil spirit. And the evil spirits say, we don't know you, but we know Paul. So Paul was known in the heavenly realms. Had he cast out those exact spirits before? I don't know. Doesn't say that. But Paul had a reputation in the heavenly realms for somebody who was following Jesus. He knew God, and even the demons knew that. So regardless of whether we know how to explain things well, in the heavenly realm and God, into God's eyes, he will see that we have a testimony that Jesus is inside of us. And in time, we will then also be able to share these things accurately with words as needed. God will give us the words that we need when we need them, if our lives are showing this testimony. So there's a few other things that I just wanted to share there about 1 John. I think one of the things that tends to happen is people who focus on overcoming, they can very easily drift into an external holiness type of a pursuit, where we're trying to look good on the outside. And so it's just good how the scriptures put together that way. So here in this section about overcoming, it says, this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. So by trying harder, we're not going to do it. It's going to be by faith. And I think that's an important thing, because I've seen that trend, and I've seen it even in myself, that pursuing holiness tends to lean towards legalism. And we see some other drifting in Christianity where it's all about tolerance and a very vague sense of love, and God just is covering your sin. Well, we're standing against that kind of a message. We're saying that we're made to be overcomers. Jesus is an overcomer, and he's inviting us, and he's giving us everything we need to be those overcomers. So I don't want to get away from that. That thought was still about what do we have to give? We want to give Jesus to the world. So we do. We don't want to just turn this all inward and try to get perfect before we can give Jesus. But it's always good to reflect on ourselves. Am I overcoming? Well, then my light will shine, and we can have faith in that. But the other thing I thought about faith here is how do we overcome? We overcome by faith. And so how do I show that in a practical way that I have faith? Well, I thought about if we knew that we needed to be overcomers and we can identify areas in our lives that we're not, those are the areas that we can exercise our faith. And by faith, that word means trust. So we need to give God that situation. We need to trust that he can do it, because really Jesus is the overcomer. And it's going to be him inside of us that brings us to that place where we have victory. And so how can I practically show faith to gain victory over a bad attitude or a gossipy mouth, or some of these things that we want to overcome? How can I have faith? How do I practically live by faith in that situation? And I thought about how the word faith means trust. So I can show that I trust God by continuously giving him those situations. And so how in Romans it talks about outdoing one another and showing honor and hospitality and some of these things, outdo one another. Well, I thought about challenging each other to outdo one another in casting our anxieties on the Lord. That's how we can show faith. Let's outdo one another. Let's be just so fast to cast our anxieties on the Lord. It says in 1 Peter, cast your cares upon him because he cares for you. Well, let's take these cares, these things that we want to so badly overcome. Let's take them as cares and cast them upon the Lord and say, Lord, I know I have no chance of overcoming this, but I'm going to cast this care upon you. I'm going to give it to you. And then God's going to give us that 1,000 or whatever strength we need, whatever word we need, whatever energy we need to resist and overcome. So that's how we can live by faith in that situation. And I guess a few other thoughts that I had there was that it was important to notice that I just kept looking through the book of 1 John a little bit, and interesting that it's written to believers. Most of the Bible is. But this word about not loving the world back in 1 John chapter 2 is written to believers. So he's just talked about children and young men and fathers. And then this is 1 John 2 verse 15. So he's clearly saying he's talking to these different believers, children, young men, fathers. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride and possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. So there's a warning to believers to overcome the world. Right, I'm just tying these things together because in 1 John 5, it talks about overcoming the world. Well, we need to know what the world is. And that's what is described here in 1 John 2. The world is the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and pride in possessions. And so another thing that I thought was important to notice is that the world is on the inside. The world is not technology and the entertainment world and all those things. The world is described here as the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and pride in possessions. Well, the lust of the eyes, that has to do with me. That has to do with what my eyes desire. So that's living by my senses. So it's not out there. The problem isn't out there. The problem is that I'm drawn to those things by my lustful eyes. My senses are telling me I want that, and it's against God. So we need to really have an understanding that the world is inside of us. It's in our flesh, because the world is described also as the lust of the flesh. Well, Galatians 5 talks about what the desires of the flesh are. And well, actually here in my ESV, it does also say the desires of the flesh. So Galatians 5 talks about the desires of the flesh. And a lot of them they're not just outward sins like sexual immorality, but there's also attitudes, dissensions and divisions and envy, things like that. Inner attitudes, those are the desires of the flesh. And they keep us from doing what the Spirit wants us to do. So again, it's inward. The desires of my eyes, that's what my senses are seeing. And yes, there are things that are naturally they're evil, but if my eyes are good, those things aren't going to pull me away. So I don't need to change the world, but I need a new set of eyes. I'm supposed to have a single set of eyes that looks to Jesus, so that if I have a wandering eye, I can't blame it on everything else in the world. I have to get my eye single. So that's where I'm just trying to get that across, that the world is really internal. The things that we're overcoming are internal mostly. Our eyes, our senses is how I thought about it. And then the attitudes, the desires of the flesh, a lot of them are attitudes, internal. And then pride in possessions. Well, for believers, it could be things like our house or our job, some of these possessions, things that we have that make us feel important, but it even creeps in more in a sneaky way. Pride and possessions can be things like gifts and accomplishments, spiritual status, these kind of things. Just to even be personal, I've even had thoughts like, wow, look at my worn out Bible. Look at how much I read. That is a pride and possession thing. It's not I didn't give myself that desire to study the Bible. So things like that, just strange thoughts. You've probably had them too, but these very unholy thoughts, they can come in. And we're talking about believers here. So we can have all these different lusts that come in, even though we're believers. So I just want us to see that no matter where we're at in our Christian walk, we're still always battling these things. We're fighting against the world and its inside. So let's be prepared for battle. But by faith, we're going to overcome all of those things. Another thing I saw there was how much obeying God's commandments are tied to overcoming the world. And so that gave me a fresh look again at how to see God's word. We've talked about trembling at God's word, having a reverence for it and just listening closely. Well, here's another way to look at it. If I was going to paraphrase this verse here, I could say back in 1 John 5, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome, for everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. Well, you could put the word because in place of the word for. So then it would sound like this. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome, because everyone who's been born of God overcomes the world. So when I read it like that, it gave me a different picture, a little more clearly. His commandments are not burdensome because they're designed to help you overcome the world. So now it's a joy to look at his commandments because they're actually his tools to help me overcome the world. So it can help us to value the scriptures more when we see that his commandments are gifts to us. And then I guess that's kind of it. I guess I wanted to just impress that the world is inside of us. So we've got this battle. This is nothing new. We've heard about overcoming. I actually looked in my bookshelf the other day and I see that I have 2 books two different authors, and they're both called The Overcoming Life. So this is not a new topic at all, but these are my thoughts for the week here as I've been thinking about giving Jesus away, having something to give of Jesus. And we want to. I believe there's a sincere desire in a lot of us to share Jesus and to give him. We see people struggling and we see people hurting, and we want them to have Jesus, and that's a good desire. And so we don't want to get all self-focused, but it's good to check. What is the Jesus what's the essential Jesus that I need to be giving away? And as we live an overcoming life of beating this world that is inside of us, all these different lusts, these different desires, distractions, as we beat those things, we are going to have a testimony. Even if you're not good with words, you're going to have a testimony. It's going to be known that Jesus is inside of us, inside of you. And so I just want to wrap it up with the example that I see in Luke 24. Jesus has been resurrected, and he's walking down the road with those two disciples on the way to Emmaus, and he explains the scriptures to them. And at the end of it, those disciples say, "Weren't our hearts burning when we heard that?" Well, Jesus never really said there, "Hey, I am the Christ, look at me." He explained the scriptures. And the result was that their hearts were burning. And so if our hearts are, if we're living this overcoming life before God, we are desiring to live a clean, overcoming life, that's going to be the result. We don't have to draw attention to ourselves. It's not always about sharing so much with words. I saw that in that example there in Luke 24, that Jesus was pointing indirectly to himself through the scriptures, but he did it in such a way that they didn't know, but they knew their hearts were burning. And we can have that testimony too. As our lives get cleaner and cleaner and we gain victory and we have more and more of a simple and singular focus on Christ and having him glorified in our life, whether somebody sees it or not, then when we do share, that will be the result. People's hearts will burn because they will know that they came in contact with God through us being holy and overcoming. So it's one step at a time. It's a cookie here. It's a word there. But I'm encouraged by that thought that I don't have to have fancy words. I can live my life before God. I can cast my cares upon him, let him give me the strength and the power every hour. And then our hearts, or others' hearts, will burn as we share. And I think that ties into, we talked about prophesying, sharing, building each other up. Well, then we're going to have a testimony of overcoming, and that's going to be the effect. It's going to cause others' hearts to burn, and that's how we're going to have the real Jesus to give to a lost world, and we're going to have the real Jesus to give to each other, because believers need this. We just saw that the world is in us. So I need to keep hearing that testimony of believers overcoming. I need to keep hanging around people who might not know how to explain it, but they're overcoming. And I'm going to be challenged and convicted by seeing this life, whether it's when we're working together. Oh, there's no grumbling there. It's just a good work ethic, or on and on. There's so many things. So let's pursue that. Let's pursue that essential life of Jesus, this life of an overcomer.